Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The AI Journey, Changing Gear, Changing Lanes, and Reaching Your Destination. I'm Paul Dewar, Head of Practice for Delivery at Agile, and I'm delighted to chair today's session. Really pleased you could join us for what's going to be another great discussion. We'll talk about how you can ramp up the implementation of AI in your business, key areas of AI maintenance, and how to differentiate between owning and using AI. Before we get going, a few quick housekeeping points. So the webinar presentation will run for 30 minutes and we'll have a 10-minute Q&A at the end. Please feel free to drop any questions you have in the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll aim to answer them at the end of the session. If anyone has already added the question you would like to ask, please give it a thumbs up. And that'll let us know what kind of the topic with most interest is. And finally, the webinar today is being recorded. So if you miss anything or if you want to revisit the discussion, you'll be able to access it later. So once again, I'm joined by two fantastic speakers who bring with them a wealth of expertise in AI and data strategy, data management and governance. We're joined by Ben Howarth, who is Head of Practice for AI here at Agile, who'll be discussing some of the technical aspects of your AI models and practices, and Mel Hodge, Head of Practice for Data Strategy and Governance, who has some great insights to share around how best to navigate the ever-evolving regulations and internal management of AI. So let's get started. The big question here is, should you build your own AI? And if you do, what are the key differences in governing it versus when you've created it yourself or bought it in? So Ben, over to you to kick things off, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Paul. I think it's a great analogy to start with. So what we're talking about here is, should we build our own or should we take off the shelf? So we're carrying on with our car analogy as we have done with the previous webinars, and we're talking about taking a taxi or actually using our own car. But there's a big elephant in the room, and I want to put that one to one side just for 2 minutes, and just take everyone back to the very first webinar where we actually talked about what happens when we decided we wanted to use AI or we wanted to build an agent for our business. So somebody had an idea and said, and I'll use this as my kind of analogy, I want to save our call staff time from answering the generic questions so they can actually help our customers with the more complex bits that do require the human touch. And so we went down a process and everyone agreed that was a great idea, and we built out a set of requirements, and those requirements were quite specific for our business and our use case, and they answered all of the questions which our technology colleagues as well as our business colleagues came up with, and we agreed those requirements and took them forwards. We fast forward a little bit and we're about to go into that journey of now actually, let's build this application, let's get it into the real world, let's get it in front of our customers. And the question now comes up, and this is where the elephant in the room is, actually, we're starting to see it's quite a costly process. And it's not dramatically costly, but it is slightly more costly than what we originally thought. And we're looking back to see our ROI on how we're actually going to get that investment back and what we're actually going to deliver for our customers. And there's a brainwave in the office that somebody says, there's some agents which are already built, and we could actually use one of those. And the big question is, what does that actually mean for the technology teams as well as for the business teams? So from a technology point of view, first of all, we may not actually understand how the agent's built. We may not understand how to train it properly. We may need to actually go through retraining ourselves. It may not actually accept some or all of the data that we were anticipating using. And we may need to go back those steps and start rebuilding our training data along with all of our training questions and validating them, which has an additional cost on our business, not just from a technology point of view, but also from the guys in the call center, because they're going to be the ones that understand the questions coming in, they'll understand how to answer them, and they'll be able to push us in the right direction for that data that we so deeply need to train the application properly. And then there's a second set of questions, which go back to the business. So if we take this agent that we can see, that we can buy and we can purchase, and it looks cheaper on the face of it, is it going to actually answer all of those requirements we had? So some of those requirements will be, if we put them into a Moscow scale, we must have them. Does it tick the boxes for that? Some of them will go down to would like to have them. So maybe some of those are the ones that we're going to lose out on. And as a business, we need to make a decision if we're happy with that. And then between our technology and our business teams, we need to come together to actually assess whether or not taking that taxi buying that agent off the shelf is actually more beneficial than building our own. And there's a whole host of additional bits which I'm going to hand over to Mel in a sec, where Mel will be able to describe around the governance models that you potentially have to apply for those two different scenarios. The technology world for us is it should be able to run on the same technology. The question would be more around, do we actually have the teams and the capability to run that off the shelf version, or do we need to retrain those people? And as I say, from the business point of view, it's all about that training data. Can we get the same responses that we were hoping to get from the first time round? Mel, did you want to enlighten us on the governance of trying to take a taxi or getting in our own car?
Thanks, Ben. That was really interesting. So reflecting on the analogy of owning a car versus a taxi in the governance world, you would look at it as with the car, you control everything. You control the build, the maintenance schedule, the speed at which it goes, because you're fully responsible for it and it's your hands on the steering wheel. When you take a taxi or you use a commercial off-the-shelf solution, you're outsourcing all of those worries, but you now have different ones. Is the driver driving the way in the right way? Are they driving in a way that you approve of? Are they going to get you to your destination on time, safely, and in a way that meets all of your needs? Getting a taxi means it might be quicker when you start, and it's going to be less maintenance heavy as time goes on, because the taxi firms are obviously responsible for all of those sorts of things. But you still have to ensure that you've got your Google Maps running in the background, checking that you're going in the right direction, that everything's following. But you've got those things in place that you need to be able to monitor what's going on, monitor the results, monitor. You still need to adhere to all of your known the 5 pillars. So, are you being fair? Are you being accountable? Are your results transparent? Can you explain the decisions? All of those things still count. Is the AI safe? Are there vulnerabilities maybe that you don't fully understand because it's a black box that you're using? Are there vulnerabilities within the AI itself or within the user group that you need to be aware of? Can customers contest the results? Can they seek redress when things go wrong? All of that still matters. And you'll need to make sure that you've got that capability built in that closes the gap between what you've bought and what your requirements are. The taxi might not be able to drop you off right outside your house. You're going to have to close that gap. So I believe there are no shortcuts for compliance, and everything's moving really quickly at the moment. So you benefit from the fact that the AI should be the AI company that's developing those agents should be, sort of keeping an eye on the compliance, but you're still responsible for your customers and the way that they then are treated by that AI. So back to you, Paul.
Awesome. Thanks very much, both. Some good stuff there. So a quick reminder, folks, if you have any questions, please do drop them into the Q&A and we'll pick them up at the end. So next up, we're going to take a step further into how we look at and implement new opportunities in AI. So how do we ensure our maturity levels matches the way that we're using it? So Ben, back to you for this, please.
Yeah, so I'll pass over to Mel in a bit for the maturity piece. It's very interesting and kind of plays a lot into what we've talked about throughout the series webinars. But let's first of all just talk about how we're going to get from having that AI application ready to go with change gear. We're talking about here of getting out of second gear and into third. So first gear really was getting those training wheels on. So that was getting all of our requirements together, and then actually the momentum of the project starts to get going. So we've already changed gear into second. We've done our development. We've spent a lot of time testing, and we've used our business-facing teams to actually do a lot of that testing for us. Again, they're the people who understand what customers are going to ask, and they're also the people who are closest to the answers they're going to give out. So it's very important that those guys are on board, and everything that they can think of has been tested. You're always going to get those left field questions which are going to come in from customers that nobody expected to receive. But we should also now, before we change to third gear, we need to make sure we have the processes behind the scenes to deal with those. So I'm sure Mel will talk about it when she talks about the maturity, but this is around pieces like making sure we have a complaints process in line. So we always have a complaints process for our businesses. But actually, when we talk about AI, we need to make sure we have a focused one for the AI application. It's not a human. We have to remember that. It's going to give human-like responses, but it's still an artificial intelligence application that's going to do its best to understand what it's being asked and to do its best to give the right answer. So we're getting ready to change lanes, and change gears, and at the same time, we also need to change lanes. And why we might need to do that is within our own business, there may be a second team putting together a second AI application. And we need to make sure that we're not going to trip over each other. So we need to make sure that the application is established, that it runs on its own with its own team of people looking after it and safeguarding it. We talked about previously, and Mel did just recently, about doing MOTs on the application, making sure that it's always up to date, making sure that it's always fit for purpose. So we need to do that synchronization of changing gear, getting from second to third, and also changing lane from the inside lane to the middle lane, almost at the same time. And there's going to be some fears that come back from the business around, have we taken the jump too quickly? Especially if this is our first application we're putting live, and the nervousness that sits behind it of what's it actually going to say to our customers? How's it honestly going to react? This is everything that you're going to find out on the day one that you actually push the button and you put it live. And there is no amount of testing you can go through that will give you every one of those scenarios as an answer. So you have to do everything you can. We rely really heavily on our colleagues from governance. So we rely extremely heavily on people like Mel to make sure that we've ticked the right boxes, that we've done everything, and they will guide us through that roadmap as technology and business teams to make sure we have done that exercise and we're ready to go. And we have to believe that we've done then everything we can. Now Mel's going to take us through a really cool piece, which is, I guess, the maturity and how we build that maturity level up. And it's really important, because that's when we have that maturity and that belief inside us, that's when we know we're ready to go. So hopefully, Mel, that was a nice intro into how you're going to take us
maturity
through.
assessment. So I think it's a great tool actually to actually help you accelerate your whole process. It will give you clear guidance on what steps you need to take and how you get to your destination. So for those that maybe haven't come across the concept of a maturity assessment before, it helps you evaluate where you are. So your current capabilities, your practices, and your readiness in any specific domain, so data or AI, against an established framework or set of benchmarks, which obviously we've spent a lot of time developing and building. So what's it for? Right, it'll help you understand where you are today in terms of governance, literacy, processes, skills, and tools. It'll help you identify the gaps and strengths in your current approach. It will help you prioritise investment and set realistic and targeted goals, which I think is really key. If you set out on a journey without knowing the destination, how do you know that you're getting there, that you're actually heading towards the right destination, and that you're spending your hard-won funding in the right sort of way? And it also allows you to manage your stakeholders more effectively, because you can align them on a shared view of sort of progress and accountability. So why is it good? Well, I think it replaces guesswork with evidence, and obviously we're all data driven nowadays, and we're a data organization, so absolutely, let's get that evidence up there. Helps you avoid wasting time on shiny new things when you're not ready for them, and it helps you to avoid skipping essential foundations, as you've already touched on, Ben, and making sure that it's not just ticking a box, it's actually you have got those people in place, those policies and practices in place that you need. So I think it's like your GPS, keeping the analogy running, it's the GPS as part of the journey, right? So it gives you a reliable starting point, shows the best way forward, warns about traffic and issues ahead, and then it helps you track improvements over time. And I think, no maturity check, you're driving blind. You don't know where you're going, you don't know where you started from, and that's a big issue. So now we're going to move on to, I think, the maturity mountain. So this is the agile maturity mounting. Everyone has this journey ahead of them, moving from reactive data usage to sort of fully strategic data-driven business models. Each stage reflects a cultural shift in how data is perceived and used, and it's quite easy to underestimate the effort involved in the cultural shift, moving from stage 1 to stage 6. So I'm just going to quickly take you through the stages. And we've got a bit of a poll in a minute, and I'm going to ask everyone to sort of judge where they are on this scale. So listen carefully to the definitions, and then vote at the end. So stage 1, data as a consequence. This means that you're collecting data because systems just happen to generate it. It's a byproduct of transactions. It's stored, but you rarely use it. Insight minimal. Governance, accidental. It's the map that you never get out of your glove box. So then stage 2, data as a reference. At this stage, you're starting to use data and AI, well, data to inform decisions manually, pretty much in spreadsheets, reports, dashboards. They're all still retrospective. It's helping you to validate decisions, but things that from yesterday, the week before, it's not driving decisions, it's looking backwards. So you're looking in the rearview mirror rather than through the windscreen to drive your car. And then data as a resource, this is where you're investing in data, treating it as an asset because you're targeting maybe AI as part of your journey to becoming data driven, or you may be wanting to introduce some robotic processes and all of those sorts of good things that we can do nowadays. And we all know that, you know, good data is the foundation for all of this. There's more structure, there's more ownership, and there'll be some early attempts at governance. So you may have patchy governance. There might be in certain teams, there might be people that sort of feel like they're looking after their data appropriately, but it won't be consistent across the organization, and there'll be areas that are, you know, pretty low in their data literacy, but other areas maybe are starting to move forward. And data is starting to be seen as something that does support operations, but the full potential isn't yet tapped, and you're sort of at the petrol station now filling your tank, but you're not driving efficiently. So data as an enabler is where things start to get exciting. So data processes are actively shaping business process. So you're starting to become data driven. You're making decisions based on what you're finding out about your own business through your own operations. So you've got predictive models up and running, automation, maybe doing some AI prototyping. The organization is recognizing data as a competitive advantage. And you're no longer just looking at the road, you're actively steering. You're rally driving, you've got your co-pilot telling you what to do, and you can predict what's coming ahead. Data as a strategic asset is where you're now using it to explore new services, test strategic hypotheses, de-risk innovation. And I think that's a really powerful thing. I think we're using innovation to spot new routes to market. We're trying to use it. We're using data to drive agility, all those sorts of things. So the more you know about yourself as an organisation, the better that innovation is going to be, and the more cost effective and relevant. And you're using all sorts of testing. You're modelling future scenarios and assessing what works and moving on from what doesn't. Data becomes part of your organisation's ability to learn and adapt, and it's at the root of everything that you do. I can't actually think of a car analogy for that because I've already used the value driving one, so I'll come back to that one in a minute. And then data as the business model. I mean, at the top of the tree, we're talking the gaffers, you know, the Googles, Amazons, Facebooks, all those sorts of people. It's not just supporting the business, it is the business. Every product, every service, every decision is infused and driven through insight. Feedback loops are absolutely built in, and the organization is completely dynamic and adaptive and built around its data. So you might be wondering how on earth you close the gap between all of these stages. So I think, and it's worth noting, that the biggest risk isn't where you are, it's assuming you're further up the mountain than you truly are. So this is why I think you need to make sure that you actually know exactly where you are. So assuming that your organization is actually in a better state than it is, believing that people are actually, you know, working as part of a governance program and all those sorts of things, but they're not truly. They're doing a bit of governanciness and not really participating. So every stage has got value, but the gap between them, what you have versus what you need, is where you'll trip up. This is where you'll be moving too fast without building that maturity. So we thought it'd be interesting to see where you will believe you are today. So where would you place yourselves on the agile data mountain? So Abby, I think you can kick off the poll, Paul.
So folks, you should all have a pop-up, and if that hasn't appeared, you should be able to find it in the chat. And if you can't see it in the chat, you should be able to see it. If you're using desktop Teams, you should be able to see it just clicking on the polls function at the top. So we'd ask you to go ahead and submit an answer for that, please. And we'll keep that open for a few more seconds.
Abby,
Yeah,
you think we're there?
I think we've got Yeah, we've got a good number of responses, and it's really interesting actually. We're kind of a bit of a grouping around data as a resource and data as an enabler. Mel, you'd mentioned just knowing where you are on the scale is absolutely key, but for folks whose organizations are around data as a resource or data as an enabler, any kind of key things they should be focusing on?
Well, it's absolutely closing those gaps, isn't it? So you need to treat AI like a capability, not a commodity. So that means deliberately building out the foundations that you need to be able to sort of move you up to that next stage. So there's a few steps that you can take. So absolutely get clear on where you are. Start with a maturity assessment, as we've just discussed. You can't close the gap if you don't know what the gap is. So this sets your baseline. This is your "you are here" marker. And then build your governance before you build your AI. So get your people into place, get your stakeholders into place, get your subject matter experts teed up, and start building those that literacy into the organization before you even put pen to paper and start developing those AI agents. Without strong data governance, you're just a governance of any type. You're just accelerating bad decisions. So get your stakeholders in place. And governance isn't about slowing things down. So I think we often criticise for being bureaucratic, and the computer says no, but actually we're not. We're really about protecting investment and protecting the stakeholders and making sure that the customers are appropriately managed and dealt with. So I think of it as the brakes, the seat belts, and the indicators that you need on your car to allow you to speed up safely. Invest in the right skills. So one of the biggest blockers to maturity is a lack of capability. So you need AI literacy across your whole organization, not just in IT, not just within those data scientists. Make sure that you're doing what you can to lift the literacy across the whole organization. You need stewards and owners who understand the role, the job, the context, and the responsibility that they carry. And more critically, you need leaders who get the strategic value of AI and data and therefore fund it appropriately. And if you can't find outside skills, which we hear a lot from organizations, then you have to grow them yourself. Spend the time. There are programs out there that allow organizations to grow literacy, and invest in that. That will help you as time goes forward. It's a long-term investment, and it will deliver results faster than stumbling around in the dark, really. So, and then strengthen your data infrastructure and accessibility. So you can't use what you can't find. So invest in data catalogs, metadata tools, and scalable integrated data platforms. Obviously, we'd say that we're a data organization, but actually you can't build a house on foundations of sand. So absolutely, those are your foundations. Look at interoperability across systems, data sharing. Make the most of the data you have within your organization for your data training, your models, those sorts of things. And then allow people to start using it, get people involved early. And then you try to move from everything and nowhere to AI at your fingertips. So that comes with increasing literacy. And then, of course, align your AI with your business strategy. So make sure that you know what matters to the business. Ben's already touched on this right back at the very early days. Once you know what the requirements are, that's what you're aiming for. So what matters to the business, and not just what's technically interesting. So we often see that things have been built because it was fascinating, it's new technology, but it's like, why did you need it? What did you need it for? Could you not just do that with a much simpler approach? So prototype to test and learn and optimize, use MVPs when you can, tie your data KPIs and your AI KPIs to your business outcomes, and then prioritize your use cases that will move you up the scale. So move the dial. Otherwise, you'll just end up with shiny dashboards and flashy tools that no one really uses. And finally, just try to close the gap. Think about AI as a capability, governance skills, culture, tools, and align that to your strategic intent. So it's not about catching up with Google or Amazon overnight. It's about deliberately taking the next step up the mountain with your brakes fitted, your engine tuned. I'm going to work on this analogy actually. Maybe you need more like ice crampons and things for the mountain, with your brakes fitted and your engine tuned and your team aligned on the route. So that's what I think you need to do to start moving that dial on your maturity.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. A reminder, folks, please do drop your questions into the Q&A and we'll pick them up at the end. Let's talk maintenance. So As organizations move forward with AI, it's obviously really important that there's long-term plans in place to maintain any AI models. So can we talk about how businesses can keep on track with those points? So what happens when things need repairing or need replacing? And Ben, over to you to kick us off on that.
Sure, thanks. So do I need to maintain my model? Yes, is the simple answer to that. And as you move along the maturity model that Mel's been describing there, you'll understand the reasons why we need to go through this process. These models are living, breathing applications. They learn all the time. They get information fed into them all the time. There are feedback loops. Customers are able to ask different questions. It will form a different opinion of the question. So I do need to MOT my application. I do need to make sure that it's still giving out answers that I believe are correct, that I want our customers to see, and I don't want it to start theorizing for itself too much and making assumptions and guessing. We need it to be a factual, honest repository for questions and answers for our customers. So yeah, I do need to do an MOT. How often do I need to do that MOT? Depends upon the type of application you're looking at. And that's the honest truth. So if I've got something which is very customer focused and very specific about customers, you should be looking at that potentially every 3 months. If you've got something which is internal and it's just used by your team and your staff, then maybe you only need to look at that once every 12 months. Depending on what the information is inside the application will depend upon how quickly and how often you need to look at it. And then the question that came up next, which I think everyone's going to come across at some point with their AI journey, is what happens when it fails? What happens when it doesn't give an answer I expect? What happens when something happens that we didn't account for? So first of all, go back to the very start and the pieces that Mel's been talking about, maturity of data and your business and organizations. We need to make sure we have a complaints process that's focused on these AI applications. Our customers will give us the first warning signs that something's not quite right. So we need to listen to those customers, and we shouldn't be afraid to receive those comments. We need those to tell us when something's not giving the right answer. And that may in its own right trigger the need for another MOT, another test, another refresh. We may need to retrain some of the data. We may need to retrain some of the questions and answers. It's not something to be afraid of. And it will actually show you've moved along that maturity scale that Mel was talking to us about, because we're now starting to expect it. We've got the processes in the background. We're expecting things to not always be 100%, but we have the processes behind the scenes to fix them and to know how to maintain them and to know how to deal with them when they come in. And if I just take the final point and then pass over to Mel for the last couple, but how long does an application live for? They don't live forever. And they shouldn't, we shouldn't try to reuse them for purposes we didn't initially design them for. And that's a really key piece. So the question about how long will it live is more about how long will that function that you had, the initial requirement, the function you wanted to replace with AI, how long will that stay in your business? And if it naturally comes to the end of its life, then the application will come to the natural end of its life too. Don't be tempted to reuse it and repurpose it for something it was not intended to be used for. That will only ever bring you more failed tests and more requirements to go back and do an MOT and retrain and retest. So the final couple of parts, Mel, I'll just hand over to you for the final couple of bits.
Thanks, Ben. I've got a minute, so I think I'll go really fast. Right, so AI, how does AI governance and maintenance support AI? Well, so I think it's the backbone of responsible AI. So it's all the technical monitoring, oversight and accountability. And good governance means we're not just tracking outcomes, we're acting on them. So, we're not just dashboarding, we're actually sort of doing things as a result of what we're seeing. We know who's responsible for interventions. We've got great tooling that can detect issues before they're cascading, and we've got great controls in place. I think it's a really powerful thing to do, to make sure that you're monitoring and you're looking at the dashboard lights all the time. You're looking for that oil light when it comes on, and you take action as soon as it does. Without it, obviously, you'd be running on empty, but hoping no one would notice. So anyway, and then another key issue, I think, is people moving on and losing knowledge. So this is one of the big hidden risks, really, and I think it's quite a key thing within AI and within governance. It's not self-sustaining. So when the scientist leaves the team or the product owner shifts off to somewhere else, what institutional knowledge has walked out with them, and how can you mitigate that? So make sure that you've got your documented assumptions, you've got clear ownership roles, and your succession planning all the time for that ownership, so no one ever drops the ball and it's there, and you're asking yourself all the time, do I have enough skilled mechanics to keep this thing running if something breaks? Ben's already touched on how long that things live, but I think, I just want to say there is always the temptation to keep them running because it's just not cheap. But actually, you need to keep asking yourself, is it still fit for purpose? Can I reuse elements of it? And do I need to consider decommissioning? And it's just keep asking those questions. Treating it like a permanent asset is a mistake. It's more like leasing a car. So great value while it's performing, but only if you keep it serviced and know when to swap it out. So that's my final car analogy. So yeah, big message. It isn't set and forget. It's a living system, really. It needs eyes on the road, hands on the wheel, and regular pit stops. So maintenance isn't the boring bit, it's the bit that stops you from ending in the ditch. There you go. End of car analogy.
Fantastic.
Thanks very much. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, both. Okay, so time for some Q&A just now. So we've got a few questions coming and we'll have a bit of a look with them. We'll start with a question from VJ. So VJ's asked, how do we convince our stakeholders to deploy AI when there is no AI readiness at their end? What is the strategy we need to formulate given that everyone has started thinking about AI agents at scale?
I think this is a...
I was going to say, I think Mel's best place to answer this one. Yeah, I was going to say this is all about your maturity.
I think it's partly maturity, but it's also partly business value. So if you're going to try and take your stakeholders on a journey, you need to actually get them on the bus in the first place. You need to convince them that it's worth it. So identify those use cases that actually are painful to your business, that you spend a huge amount of time doing, maybe sort of a difficult and tricky, and use that use case to drive increasing literacy. And as I said earlier on, go back and make sure you're starting to find find your champions, find your storytellers, which is, I think, a really key aspect to that as well. So someone that can articulate the benefits for things and do it in a way that is tied right back to your business. So don't be a hammer looking for a nail. Actually find the story that you can link the two things together for. So if you know that the contact center has been told that they've got to reduce overheads by X% this year, go and use that use case as a way of demonstrating how powerful AI can be. You find your sort of predictive analytics stories, be the storyteller and the champion that drives that sort of need through the business, but always link the technical to the business value, and then monitor it and keep demonstrating it, keep telling those stories, keep demonstrating those stories. Goes right back to what we've sort of taught at school. Don't expect your audience to do the work. Present the story to them and take them on that journey. And it is a bit about literacy, a bit about governance, but it's also about your business case and demonstrating value.
Thank you. Ben, you mentioned ROI right at the start of the presentation. There's a question here from Ollie about that. So Ollie's asked, with finances always under pressure, how do you work out the ROI of building an AI model versus buying off the shelf?
Great question. I guess for me, it's about, is this a one-off for your business, or is this something that you're looking to potentially expand upon and do more of? So yeah, Mel's given us a really good overview of like a business maturity. And as the business matures and it understands that actually it's no longer there to collect data, it's there to use data. And that should be the pinnacle and the goal for it. more and more businesses will turn to AI models to actually use that data to give them that investment, return on investment. But it's not always going to be a financial return on investment. Sometimes it's also going to be a physical return on investment. So depending on what the AI model's there to do, if it's there to buy more time for your contact staff to actually spend more time on the phone talking to customers that need one-on-one assistance, rather than just very simple, quick lookups for something that they could potentially find on your website, the return on investment is going to be very much more of a physical asset. In you have more free time in your contact center, and customers are going to give you a better NPS score because you're helping them in a better way they're expecting. If it's just pure financial return, it's very hard to quantify, is the honest answer. And then buying one off the shelf against building one, if you're not sure you're going to have a number of AI models in your business, then maybe buying one off the shelf is the right way to do it, because you don't have to have the same investment in staff and technology to do that initial development work. But it's not it's not just buy it off the shelf and forget about it. You still need people in the business, such as your governance teams, your business teams, and your technology teams, to know how to monitor, train, test, react when something goes wrong, deal with scenarios when a customer raises a complaint. So going back to the principles that Mel was talking about, regress, and how we address them, that's all part of the process. So I don't honestly believe there's a natural, if we invest X, we'll get Y back. But each business needs to look at that use case and actually say, what is it we're trying to achieve, and get AI in to do the right thing, rather than just because the other companies within our group all have AI, so it must be the right tool to have. That's not always the right answer.
Thanks, Ben. I think there's time for one more question, and there's something coming from Stephen that just follows on from what you were saying there. So Stephen has asked, as we don't have an internal AI capability yet, our business units buy in all AI solutions. Are there any dangers in this?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you could be buying in contradictory tool sets and those sorts of things. Actually, you're not creating things as part of a sort of a strategy. So you're going to buy bits and pieces as opposed to a cohesive sort of concert of tools that can work together. There's going to be, if your business units are allowed to go out and sort of buy their own thing, who's monitoring them, who's ensuring that they're transparent, who's ensuring that they're producing the right results, who's linking that back to the business drivers that you started out at the beginning. If you're trying to demonstrate return on investment, how do you do that if everyone has a little tiny piece of the puzzle? That doesn't mean that you can't do it like that, but I would recommend having a sort of a bigger plan that you can then place these agents within, and you know where the boundaries are, where the sort of the pinch points are going to be, and all of those sorts of things. So don't let it evolve. Try and do it strategically. Try and have a plan that can control it, rather than just a sort of a piecemeal sort of we want one of those and we want one of those, and it's all a bit of a let's buy some of these shiny new tools, as opposed to, and it goes right back to what we've said all along, is why are you doing this? What is it for? That links back to your business value and all of those sorts of things as well. If you know what it's worth to you, you know why you're doing it, then you know what you need and how much investment you've got, and it's bringing that all together. It's within a strategy, really, or a plan, a roadmap that you can have as an organisation.
Thanks.
If I may just add to that as well, also just be aware when you're buying off the shelf where your data is stored. So we've had multiple customers who thought they were buying something off the shelf, and actually when you look into the depths, you find out that it's stored not necessarily in a country that you want it to be stored in. So there's a security aspect that you also have to bring into this whole piece.
Super. That feels like a good place to stop. So a huge thank you to Ben and Mel for sharing your expertise. Folks, if today's discussion resonated with you and you'd like to assess your AI maturity, please do reach out to us for an AI maturity assessment. If you have any further questions or if you want to explore specific AI challenges in your organization, then get in touch. Let's continue the conversation. Don't forget that the recording of this webinar will be available, so feel free to revisit or share with your colleagues. And finally, a big thank you for joining us for this series. We've shared 3 sessions together around AI, and I know there's an awful lot more that Ben and Mel have to say on this topic. So stay tuned for our next webinar series, which will be taking place after the summer. Thanks again for coming along, and see you next time.